For over 100 years, Africa's borders have served as invisible chains. These were not natural boundaries, but lines drawn by distant hands, by men in ornate halls thousands of miles away, splitting families, fracturing cultures, and keeping promising nations small and divided. This division was no accident. It was engineered to weaken, to ensure the continent would always need permission to act, to move, to dream. But now, something unimaginable is happening. In the sun-scorched heart of the Sahel, the leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have done what everyone said was impossible. They have erased the colonial borders between them and declared themselves one. No longer three vulnerable states, but a single, united force. One flag, one army, one destiny. This is not a theoretical dream, nor a temporary alliance. It is a lived reality, the Sahel superstate. What if a single decision made deep in Africa could send shockwaves through Paris, Washington, and Brussels? Imagine the world's most powerful cities, with their centuries-old institutions and self-assured leaders, suddenly scrambling to understand, to react, to control, but finding themselves powerless in the face of a new reality. This is not a hypothetical. It is a living story, unfolding now, with consequences that could reshape the world as we know it. Think of the borders between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Each line, each checkpoint, was an echo of the Berlin Conference of 1884, where European empires carved up Africa, not with the people in mind, but with their own ambitions at heart. Ancient kingdoms, like Mali's great empire or Niger's noble house estates, were erased from the map, and their legacies reduced to fragments. Imagine families waking up to find themselves citizens of different countries, forbidden to trade, to visit, to marry as freely as they once had. Trade routes that had carried gold, salt, and stories for centuries were severed overnight. These boundaries did not simply redraw the land. They shattered identities, disrupted economies, and handed the keys to Africa's future to distant capitals. To truly grasp why this moment matters so deeply, we must first ask, how did these borders become prisons? And why does breaking them now feel like the start of something unstoppable? The world watched, stunned, as these nations tore up the rules imposed by foreign capitals. This was not just grandstanding. It was a direct challenge to centuries of outside control. For the first time, African leaders refused to wait for approval from Paris, Washington, or Brussels. Their declaration was unmistakable. Africa will shape its own fate, starting now. Yet the stakes could not be higher. If this fragile unity shatters, the Sahel could plunge back into chaos and dependence, handing power back to the old world order. But if it holds, the balance of power in Africa and across the globe will change forever. It is not just the fate of three nations, but of an entire continent and its place in the world that hangs in the balance. Let us journey back to the origins of Africa's borders and the forces that built them. Only then can we see why their erasure could upend the world. At the center of it all stands President Ibrahim Traoré. His voice now carries far beyond the lines that once divided his people. He is not simply a national leader. He is the spark of a movement, signaling to every corner of the continent that the age of division may finally be ending. Consider how, in the past, leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana dreamed of continental unity, but were thwarted by outside interference. Traoré's vision stands on their shoulders, but goes further, turning ideas into action and action into a living experiment. These lines on the map were never just ink. They were shackles. For generations, they kept Africa divided, powerless, and easy to control. Consider the example of the Uwe people, whose homeland stretches across what is now Ghana and Togo, yet whose families and villages were split apart by the arbitrary boundaries drawn by colonial officials. Or the Tuareg nomads, whose traditional routes across the Sahara were cut off by new frontiers, turning friends into foreigners overnight. But the wound cut deeper than geography. These artificial lines turned neighbors into strangers, made nations into islands, and isolated communities from one another. Outsiders found it effortless to exploit Africa's resources, while generations of Africans inherited the scars, stolen prosperity, fractured heritage, and progress forever just out of reach. In Congo, for example, Belgian rule left a legacy of violence and extraction, with millions suffering under forced labor for rubber and minerals. Independence brought new flags, but not true freedom. Western control only shifted its shape, aid laced with conditions, crippling sanctions, and foreign troops stationed on African soil. Power remained elsewhere, and dependence became the new chain. In the 1960s and 70s, many African countries found their economies tied to export quotas and prices set in London, Paris, or New York, not in Lagos, Nairobi, or Dakar. The infamous CFA franc, still pegged to the euro and governed from Paris, remains a symbol of this lingering control. Return to the Berlin Conference of 1884. Behind closed doors, European empires carved up the continent to suit their own ambitions. Not a single African leader was present. Their voices, histories, and aspirations were ignored. Ancient kingdoms vanished, trade routes were severed, and entire families found themselves split overnight. Colonial borders did not simply redraw the land. They shattered identities, disrupted economies, and handed the keys to Africa's future to distant capitals. The Ashanti Empire, once a formidable force in West Africa, was divided between the British and the French, its people forced to adapt to foreign rule and foreign laws. So in January of 2025, these so-called fragile nations made a choice. They took a step so audacious, it forced the whole world to stop and watch. No parades, no fireworks. Just 3 presidents, side by side, doing what Europe once called impossible. The world's eyes turned to the Sahel, uncertain whether this new union would spark hope or catastrophe. For the first time in generations, Africans themselves were seizing the pen to write the next chapter. Yet deep in the Sahel, change was stirring. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, long dismissed as weak, easily swayed, began turning away from foreign dictates. Instead, they extended hands to each other, daring to imagine unity where there had always been division. They studied the lessons of history, the failed Mali Federation of the 1960s, the collapse of Pan-African solidarity under pressure from the Cold War, and the economic sabotage faced by leaders like Thomas Sankara. The risks could not be higher. Challenging these foundations means risking retaliation, isolation, and chaos. But the price of silence is just as steep. More stolen wealth, more broken communities, more futures mortgaged to distant powers. To reclaim dignity means stepping into danger, but it is also the only path to finally rewriting the story. Consider South Sudan, which gained its independence only to face economic hardship when its oil exports were controlled by pipelines running through Sudan, illustrating how borders can continue to be used as levers of control. On a quiet January afternoon, the leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger signed away over 140 years of colonial lines. With a single declaration, they erased their borders and gave birth to the Sahel superstate, one nation, one flag, one army, and a shared future. This was not symbolism. Overnight, the new union commanded more than 70 million people and over 270 million acres of Africa's most strategic ground. They now held the keys to gold, oil, and almost 1/3 of the world's uranium, resources that, for the first time, would serve African ambitions instead of foreign shareholders. In comparison, consider how OPEC reshaped the world oil market in the 1970s when a group of oil-rich nations coordinated their policies and challenged Western dominance. The Sahel superstate, with its uranium reserves, has the potential to similarly influence global energy markets, especially as nuclear power remains crucial for countries like France. But the wave spread faster than anyone predicted. Inspired by the Sahel's audacity, Botswana took on its diamond oligarchs, demanding fair profits for its people. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, local investors funded new railways, linking rich mineral basins straight to the coast, cutting out foreign middlemen for the first time in living memory. Zimbabwe announced new partnerships with Chinese and Indian technology firms to process lithium domestically, keeping value within Africa. In Kenya, youth coalitions mobilized to demand greater participation in the East African community, seeing the Sahel example as proof that unity brings strength. Was immediate. The new government announced urgent reviews of every foreign mining deal, promising an end to exploitation and a return of wealth to African hands. Within days, critical gold and uranium mines came under national control. Borders unlocked, letting Africans move, trade, and dream across the Sahel as one people. Local entrepreneurs in Ouagadougou and Bamako began exporting goods to each other directly, without the need for foreign currency exchanges or burdensome tariffs. The lives of ordinary farmers and traders began to change. They could now access wider markets, find better prices for their goods, and reunite with family members across former borders. Across the continent, Africa's youth felt a powerful shift. On social media, in packed city streets, and in university halls, a fresh Pan-African identity took root, fueled by the promise that unity could transform resources into opportunity. Hashtags like #OneAfrica and #SahelRising trended for weeks, and musicians from Lagos to Kampala released anthems celebrating the fall of old borders. Debates raged in classrooms and coffee shops about what true independence and unity could look like, and how to avoid the mistakes of past generations. Now, as the world watches, the true test begins. Can the Sahel superstate survive its first storm? Or will old powers reclaim control? Everything teeters on the edge. If these reforms succeed, Africa could finally break the cycle of dependency. But if they fail, the dream of unity risks shattering under crushing pressure from within and without. When the world's most powerful nations decide you have gone too far, do you stand your ground, or do you break beneath their weight? This is the question that echoes through every ministry, every marketplace, every home in the Sahel superstate today. The backlash was fierce and swift. Western governments unleashed sanctions and froze aid. Banks severed credit. Headlines branded the movement reckless and dangerous. International organizations warned of instability and economic collapse. But on the ground, hope only grew. Many now believed this was Africa's long-awaited chance to seize its destiny. In the past, similar moves, like the nationalization of oil in 1970s, had been met with external pressure, but also laid the foundation for future autonomy. Barely days after the Sahel superstate is declared, an international backlash arrives like a storm. France, the United States, and the entire European Union unleash sweeping sanctions, sever foreign aid, and tighten banking restrictions. Almost overnight, the new union is frozen out of the global financial system it once depended on. Its leaders become pariahs, accused of destabilizing the world order. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund announced the suspension of development loans. International news channels run 24-hour coverage warning of food shortages and political instability. But the assault is not just economic. Across global news networks and every social feed, carefully crafted stories portray the Sahel superstate as the next failed experiment in African unity. Headlines predict chaos, dictatorship, and imminent collapse. In Western capitals, officials question the union's legitimacy. Analysts and think tanks flood the airwaves with dire predictions. Within mere months, they say, the alliance will fall apart. These narratives echo the fate of the United Arab Republic, the brief union of Egypt and Syria in the late 1950s, used as a cautionary tale against continental unity. Inside the superstate, the strain is real. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger bring together distinct languages, laws, and histories. Old wounds and rivalries simmer just beneath the surface. Suddenly, certain politicians, journalists, and community leaders find themselves with unexpected resources, money traced back to foreign embassies and shadowy organizations. The incentive is simple: Undermine unity, and you will be rewarded. Similar tactics were used during the Cold War, when foreign intelligence agencies covertly funded opposition groups and media outlets to destabilize governments seen as unfriendly to Western interests. But pressure alone cannot decide the future. As the world watches, the alliance's next moves will prove whether hope or fear prevails. Disinformation spreads with ruthless efficiency. Deepfake videos appear online, showing fabricated quarrels between Sahel leaders. Whisper campaigns stoke fears about lost identity and security. Every scroll through social media becomes fraught with doubts and subtle manipulation, all designed to fracture the fragile alliance before it has a chance to take root. Rumors spread that Niger's uranium fields are being secretly auctioned to the highest bidder, or that the new government plans to abolish local languages. These lies are amplified by bots in foreign media, sowing confusion and mistrust.
What happens when broken borders become bridges and outsiders can no longer halt your progress? For the three nations of the Sahel superstate, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the answer arrives with breathtaking speed and unmistakable force.
The stakes are nothing less than the future of African self-determination. If the alliance collapses, it will confirm the familiar narrative that Africa is doomed to be divided and exploited. But every gesture of defiance, every moment of solidarity, hints at a new destiny, one in which Africa finally claims its place as author of its own story. This echoes the resilience shown by Vietnam after the fall of Saigon, or by Cuba following the Bay of Pigs invasion, determined to chart their own course regardless of outside pressure. Yet, under this barrage, the Sahel's leaders refuse to yield. President Ibrahim Traoré, flanked by his counterparts from Mali and Niger, holds joint press conferences and walks through crowded markets, shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens. The Sahel superstate launches live-streamed town halls and inaugurates the Sahel Council, a new institution devoted to transparency and cross-border cooperation. Step by step, they invite both the world and their own people to witness unity in practice. They publish all new resource contracts online, invite international observers to infrastructure projects, and recruit independent journalists from neighboring countries to cover events firsthand. Old divisions, once lines of suspicion and loss, have melted away. Families separated for decades now gather freely, and traders move their goods from Bamako to Niamey to Ouagadougou without pause at the ghosts of colonial checkpoints. Markets pulse with energy, echoing with talk of a new golden age, one built by African hands for African futures. In the border town of Sakasso, farmers who once had to smuggle their cotton across the boundary now openly organize regional markets, boosting incomes and building trust. Money that once drained into foreign accounts now circulates in local economies. The Sahel's Development Bank, founded with BRICS support, has already funded more startups and infrastructure in a single year than Western lenders managed in an entire decade. Resource contracts are now brokered on African soil, yielding fairer profits and bringing jobs to communities that long watched their wealth slip away. In the city of Gal, small tech firms are building solar-powered irrigation sensors. And in Niamey, young engineers have launched a startup producing affordable water filters for rural households. The change runs deeper than economics. Recent polls show public support for the union soaring well above 70%. In city streets, on radio airwaves, and across social media, a new confidence hums. Africans are refusing to let their destinies be written abroad. Leaders once mocked or sanctioned by outsiders now stand as emblems of a continent reclaiming its voice. In schools, students learn the shared history of the Sahel, and music festivals celebrate the diversity of the new union. Young people feel a sense of pride and ownership over their future. The transformation is visible everywhere. No longer waiting for Western permission, the Sahel states have launched joint projects. Roads and railways cross former frontiers. New dams harness rivers once deemed off-limits. And a vast solar megafarm, owned by all three, is now delivering clean power to Sahelian homes. The old order, where distant capitals dictated priorities, is dissolving with every watt of light and every kilometer of new track. For example, the new Trans-Sahel Railway connects gold mines in Burkina Faso with ports in Benin, bypassing the need for French or Belgian intermediaries. The Niger River, once a disputed boundary, is now being used for joint irrigation projects, turning arid lands into productive farms. Emboldened, the Sahel Alliance is designing its own currency, one immune to manipulation by European central banks. It has declared a rapid response security force, ready to defend borders and assist neighbors in crisis without relying on foreign armies. Formal pacts with BRIS nations are opening fresh avenues for trade, investment, and technology, shifting the center of gravity southward and eastward. Russia and China offer technical expertise for power plants and mining, while India provides scholarships for Sahelian students. The ripple effects are spreading. Guinea and Chad are now in talks to join the Union, and activists from Senegal to South Africa are demanding similar models of unity and self-rule. For the first time in living memory, a truly pan-African market, where resources and opportunity remain at home, feels not only possible, but inevitable. Pan-African parliamentarians in Addis Ababa debate a continent-wide visa-free regime, while business leaders from Lagos and Cairo discuss harmonized trade protocols. Not all are pleased. Leaked documents reveal repeated attempts to sabotage critical infrastructure and sow division, but each episode has only steeled the superstate's resolve. Joint security teams respond swiftly, and lessons are shared openly, closing cracks before they can widen. The model is inspired by the European Union's rapid reaction mechanisms, but tailored for local realities. Community leaders are trained in conflict resolution and cybersecurity, preparing them for hybrid threats. For centuries, Africa was told to wait, to ask, to defer. Now, it seizes its own destiny. The rewards are tangible. More wealth stays in African hands. New opportunities flourish for young people, and the dignity of self-governance is restored. Yet the greater truth is this: unity, transparency, and shared purpose can overcome even the oldest forms of outside interference. The Sahel superstate is not just rewriting its own destiny, it is offering a living blueprint for Africa, and perhaps for a world eager for new models of freedom. But as the superstate's influence grows, fresh challenges emerge, within and beyond its borders. The next test will reveal whether unity can survive the pressures of power, ambition, and old resentments. As the Union's wealth and influence grows, internal divisions could resurface. Questions of language policy, resource sharing, and political representation will need to be addressed. Will the lessons of history be heeded, or will old rivalries be reignited? This is not merely a change of borders. It is a declaration. Africans will shape their future on their own terms. The Sahel superstate is more than a break from history. It is a promise to generations yet unborn. Africa will no longer apologize for its ambition, nor ask for what is already its own. The world stands at a crossroads. If this moment is ignored, old patterns of exploitation and division may return, trapping millions in cycles of dependency and lost hope. But if we listen, if we amplify the voices rising from Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, a new chapter in global history can begin, led by African hands. This is not just the story of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. It is a message to every nation, still burdened by lines drawn by outsiders, and to every person told their fate lies in faraway capitals. The fight for self-determination is not finished. It is the defining test of our age. Consider Palestine, the Kurds, or indigenous tribes in the Americas, people still struggling for the right to define their own future. Africa is finished waiting for permission. The world must choose. Will it watch history repeat itself, or help Africa chart a new course? If you believe in a world where no one must beg for what should be theirs, where sovereignty is not a privilege but a right, then this is your moment. Share this story. Discuss it with friends and family. Uplift African voices and visions, because the choices we make now will echo for centuries.
African leaders and citizens are showing the world what unity, vision, and courage can achieve when coupled with control over their own resources. They are building new institutions, rewriting the rules of trade, and insisting that wealth serve their people first. The stakes are immense: economic opportunity, dignity, and the right to write history in African ink. The rest of the world would do well to take note, because the wind of change now blows from the Sahel.
The story is only beginning, and every voice matters. Stand with us as these bold steps mark the next phase in Africa's journey.